Hello, my name is Warren Kidd and I'm Senior Lecturer here at the Cass School of Education and Communities. This is video number 3 in a kind of series of videos really that I'm making at the end of week 1, just thinking about some of the stuff we've got coming up on a Monday over the next couple of weeks, okay, over week 2 and week 3. In week 2 you are doing some short presentation tasks, and then you have a talk session from me in the afternoon. And that talk session is about planning to enable learning to take place. And I mean, it depends when you, like what time frame you're watching this video in, but actually the materials are already in Moodle for that session if you wanted to look at them in advance, assuming that you're, looking at this video in advance. And in a sense, I'm doing planning to enable learning because I think it's absolutely crucial, but I'm also doing it the week before the micro-teach on Monday week 3, because to a very large extent the micro-teach is about demonstrating what you think the ingredients and order of a good lesson look like. So the presentations are about demonstrating your communication skills, but the micro-teach is about demonstrating your understanding of the kind of broad landscape, the brush strokes, the elements of the jigsaw that make up an effective, planned, well-crafted, orchestrated lesson. So here are some thoughts, almost seemingly at random, which all will come up in the lesson on Monday afternoon. First of all, clearly the point of the lesson is to achieve the aim and objectives and to look at what happens to learners in the process in between, the distance travelled. Some teachers engage with that by, once they've written the aims and objectives of the lesson, actually planning a lesson backwards, which seems a bit odd, and for some people it's kind of like the worst thing in the world, and for some people it really works. So they actually think about what is the plenary, what is the task at the end, which summarises all the learning in the lesson. Now we don't mean by that the teacher recapping to the learners what they've done, although that's useful as well. We mean the learners engaging themselves actively in what they've done, not in the task they've just done, but in what they've done in the lesson as a whole. And some people put that in right at the end of the lesson plan and then work backwards. Some teachers plan the starter as a discrete element. It could assess prior learning prior to then making clear the aim of this particular lesson, and in that way you begin to connect blocks and episodes of lessons together. And contradictory lessons are discrete blocks and moments in time which do kind of need to be wrapped up at the end, but they're also existing in series, continuing week by week, lesson by lesson. So you both have to have them as discrete elements, and yet somehow the learning is connected overall. Starters are a good way of doing that. Starters also have other benefits about engagement, motivation, stretch and challenge. They help you at an otherwise potentially derailed moment in the lesson to enable learners to focus. In the same way that plenaries enable learners to focus, they enable learners to reflect and to crystallise and take stock of where they're going. I guess it's easy to think about lessons as chunks or episodes, but if you do, your job is to weave the golden thread that connects the episodes together. And do you know what? You actually can't do this too clearly. So your job is to explain in constant dialogue, and we'll talk about this on Monday afternoon, constant dialogue with learners through the lesson about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how what they're doing connects together and to the aims. So you weave the thread, you sew it all together and you connect what might otherwise seem to learners sometimes as just being random chunks and bits of things to do, and you connect them all together. It might be they have one big task to do, particularly if they're doing, say, a workshop type lesson or an inquiry lesson. And in social science and humanities, we need to talk a little bit about what an inquiry lesson is, because it's actually quite a classic aspect of our pedagogy. So they might have one big task, but you might still decide to chunk it down into little bits and connect the bits together through target setting, action planning, conversation, reporting back, pair work. You also have to think about the order that you put those chunks or episodes in. And because we work in the cognitive domain on Bloom's taxonomy, and we'll talk about this on Monday, often people plan lessons structured according to Bloom's. So they start off with slightly lower order skills, okay, knowledge and comprehension. They move up into application, which is kind of at the cusp between low order and high order, or surface and deep learning. They move through into synthesis, analysis, and up to evaluation. And they do that within the time frame of a lesson. And sometimes that enables differentiation, particularly differentiation by task. So if learners do something earlier, they move up Bloom's quicker, or if they're on an extension task because they've finished a task early, they can be stretched and challenged with the next step of Bloom's quicker than maybe other groups in the room. I think it's really important to recognise that we need to get through low order quickly, but that depends actually on what time of year your lesson is in the scheme of work and curriculum as a whole. First lessons at the start of a key stage in a topic and maybe even a subject they've never ever studied before, well, you're probably going to stay in low order more than you're going to get up to higher order, because you know there are certain foundations and certain basics you've got to engage and deal with. But structuring a lesson according to Bloom's taxonomy, and maybe even poking and probing and prodding with questions in between and during tasks, scaffolded according to Bloom's, is a really productive way of extending and stretching and moving learners forwards. You have to think about the consequences of your decision making, because the wonder, the beauty of planning a lesson and the absolute nightmare at the same time is that you can kind of technically do anything. You could almost, institutional structures notwithstanding, you could almost do anything in any order. Stuff that is a starter would also make a brilliant main. Stuff that's a starter also could make a brilliant plenary. So your choice and decision making about what you do and where you kind of fit it and how elements of the lesson relate to each other, that's all for you to decide and reflect upon, but you have to articulate that somehow to the learners too. I think we would want to see clear communication. Pace is really important, and that might be about the time of tasks, the number of tasks, how rapidly they get through tasks. We don't necessarily have to see all learners doing the same task at the same time. But if they're not, and there's lots of good reasons why they might not be, you need to manage that and explain that away. You need to be moving around the room, engaging with learners, ensuring they are on task, and using your questioning skills to really engage and stretch them. But the tasks themselves need to capture their imaginations, and they need to understand what the point of those tasks are. Classic tasks in our subject areas, which have a more kind of physicality about them, are things like matching, ranking, sorting and labelling tasks, where learners can physically do something. Some teachers have that as a do now, which is almost a starter before the aim, right as you walk into the lesson. And then sometimes what teachers do is they have a do now followed by a question and answer session, and thinking time is really important when you question. and then use that as a way of revealing and exploring the aims of the lesson before moving on to another kind of episode or chunk. But again, it's about you weaving and connecting the chunks and elements together. So, episodes, pace, questioning, chunks, golden thread, starters, plenaries, clear communication, learners on task, distance travelled. Think about those things when you plan your lessons. And now your challenge is to somehow demonstrate some of those things in your micro-teach on Monday on week 3. And the session after the presentations next Monday will be all about planning to enable learning, and we'll continue in much more detail some of the themes that we've quickly raised in this video.